The audience. It's 6 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. This is the Tempe Historic Preservation Commission meeting of October 12th, 2022. Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here with a roll call and make sure we've got a quorum.
Okay, Vice Chair Fackler,
Here.
Commissioner Garrity, believe he is going to be absent. Commissioner Garrison, believe he's also absent. Commissioner Gilbert. Here. Commissioner Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Montero, can you hear us?
Here.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. Commissioner Kuroka.
Here.
Okay, Commissioner Williams has noted she is absent. Chair Woodson.
Here.
Okay. All right, so we have a quorum. We have 6 present.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Lechner. All right, moving on. We have a call to the audience, our agenda item 1. If there is anyone in the audience here tonight who wishes to speak on an item, if you could bring your little special card to the front. Is anyone here? Is everybody here for an agenda item in particular? I think it looks like everyone's here for a particular agenda item, correct? Excellent. Okay. Moving on then to agenda item number 2, approval of the meeting minutes from our September 14th, 2022 meeting. Commissioners, you have a copy of the meeting minutes. Are there any corrections or comments on this?
Chair.
Vice Chair?
Move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Very well. Do I have a second?
Yes. Commissioner Montero seconds the motion to approve the September 14th meeting minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, I think we'll take a vote on this.
All right, Vice Chair Fackler.
Aye.
Commissioner Gilbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Larson.
Aye.
Commissioner Montero.
Aye.
Commissioner Kuroka.
Aye.
Chair Woodson.
Aye.
Okay, that's 6 in favor, 0 against.
All right, thank you. Okay, approval of agenda. Does anyone need any changes or any questions on the current agenda? All right, hearing none, then I'll go ahead and approve the agenda for this evening. And I think we're ready to move on. Agenda item number 4, request for a certificate of appropriateness for a driveway extension and a new backyard detached casita and garage at the Roberts residence located at 25 West Palmcroft Drive. Presenter is James Moffitt, and I believe he is on WebEx, correct?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Moffitt. Thank you.
Good evening.
Yes, go ahead and proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't have, because I'm just going to give you a synopsis of the project. There isn't, the project is a home that was built in 1958, the original home. It's a really a beautiful ranch style home that the owners, they are the second owners of this home. The original owner was a gentleman named Ken Clark, who was at one time the oldest Tempe resident who had been born in Tempe. This house was one of the first homes built in a development in Tempe. It's a modest home. It's really a nice home, and the owners have put a lot of effort towards keeping it original. And so this proposal is as a lot of older homes are, they're lacking in some garage space. So they wanted a garage and a small livable dwelling for a family member. And when one looks at the site, there's really only one location for this. So it is adjacent to the existing garage at a 90-degree angle to it. And there is no real driveway extension, maybe an apron, but the original driveway is all in place, and we don't plan on really touching that at all. And the structure is a modest structure. It's just a gable form, a rectangular building. Sits in the back of the property, and the aesthetic of it is something that it just relates to the existing homes elements. The materials are wood siding. There's wood siding in the original home that's been finished, almost shellacked for many, many years. We're planning on using just a natural looking red cedar. We'll let it weather probably, and then it'll have the same roof and a trim color. The owners do have some trim colors on their property that stand out a bit. And so the trim on the roof and on the eaves will be, as well as the garage door, will be a color they'd like to propose there. And but it's really just it was intentionally just secondary to the main house, and the intent was to just let it kind of sit in the back and kind of disappear. And that's it. It's a very small project, 2-car garage with a very small dwelling in the back. I have a hard time seeing the drawings or any pictures. I saw that you were rotating through some pictures there, but
Yes, is there anything you'd like me to highlight specifically, sir?
you could highlight the site plan just so that it's clear as to where it's located on the site.
Okay. So, yeah, so this is where the addition would be. This is in the backyard.
Right.
So
It's in
this
the
is Palm-
southwest
Palm-
corner of the lot.
Mhm.
Right, right. And we're not touching the main house, not touching the landscaping in the front. It's pretty straightforward. Utilities, I think we're gonna underground the utilities. There won't be a electrical drop from the alley. The alley is where the electrical is, and so we're gonna underground that, clean that up. We weren't required to do any grading and drainage, but we've depressed an area in the back just to ensure that the water stays put and it percolates. And that's really it. There's not much else to describe about it. The owner did tell me that there was an article in the Arizona Republic, he said in about 3 or 4 years ago, about this house. So it does have some interesting history to it. And that's why we're not touching it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moffett, for the presentation and the information. Is anything else?
For me, no. Any questions? Yeah.
Potentially, but before I go to questions, Dr. Lechner, is there anything to add from your perspective
Yeah,
on this?
I just like to kind of reiterate what I had noted in my staff report. I feel like the plans are solid from historic preservation perspective. I mean, the one potential caveat that the commission might scrutinize a little bit more is just the placement of the proposed garage casita addition. So it's located behind the house, of course, which is good from a historic preservation standpoint. However, it will be based on the plans, kind of fully visible from the street, from Palmcroft. So normally, ideally, you would put the addition behind the house. But I know that in speaking with Mr. Moffett, he had noted there being some issues there with, I believe, sewer lines that would make moving the structure behind the house potentially problematic. The proposed additions of vertical cedar siding that Mr. Moffett had referenced strikes me as restrained, tasteful even, in terms of incorporating what you see as an element of the original home, so kind of referencing the original home without trying to replicate the appearance of that home. So I think that works. Mr. Moffett had mentioned the choice of color for the siding, which I'm going to go to here if I can. So this kind of orange color, and that is the color that's, I'm going to go back to a picture that shows it. That does match, you see some of the trim on the house there, as well as the garage itself. So it's a rather bold, shall I say, bold color. I think I personally would suggest, maybe a color that's compatible with that. Maybe not that precise color for the garage door on the addition. I just think that would help to clarify the non-historic nature of the garage and the casita addition. In terms of the proposed addition's footprint, I don't see that as being an issue. It is, of course, relatively small in comparison to the main home, and of course, how could it not be? Because the main home is quite large, approximately 3,000 square feet, because this is on two lots. It's a double lot. So at 790 square feet, it's an appropriate size. The addition clearly subordinates it to the larger historic home. The height of the proposed garage casita addition is 11 feet. And I just note that is overall shorter than the roof of the height of the historic home, which varies anywhere from 11 feet 7 inches to 13 feet 2 inches at its highest point. So that also seems appropriate. To me, again, clearly subordinating the secondary structure to the home. The applicant's proposed to use asphalt shingles. It's compatible with the historic home's roofing material, and that seems just fine. Yeah, from generally, other than the fact that it's the structure being added is not going to be, as it's proposed now, behind the home and hidden from street view. This applicant has definitely taken good historic preservation principles into consideration and met the Secretary of Interior standards, I think, to a very high degree. So.
If I may, there was one aspect of the description there. The red cedar siding that we're using on this addition, the proposed addition, is intended to be natural colored and not actually stained. That stained color is the trim of the rake of the roof, the fascia. Yeah, that right there is the actual proposed kind of color that we're intending to use on the body of this new project.
Right, and that seems. I appreciate you clarifying
Okay.
that, and
Yeah.
that seems appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking less in terms of referencing the historic home. I was thinking more in terms of just the vertical paneling,
Yes.
rather than the color itself. Yes.
Yeah, that yes, you are correct on that. Yeah.
Very well. Thank you both for the additional information. Okay, commissioners, are there any questions or comments for the presenter?
Mr. Chair,
Vice Chair?
one question. The proposed color for the trim and the door,
Yes.
is that a color match to what is there, or is that the original color of what is there? Because when you look at the pictures, the original garage door, because it faces west, has faded quite a bit in the sun. Is the new door going to be significantly brighter than that?
The new door will be brighter, and it's actually a different color. I believe is it the green? It's hard for me to see that. It's the green that he chose. The owners have those accent colors on the back of this house. The existing home right now has that sort of pale yellowish ochre as part of around the door, the front door, and this garage door. And this color is brought, I believe, to the back as well, but there's other colors in the back, and they wanted to use one of those secondary colors to distinguish it from kind of the same family, but distinguish it from the existing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other commissioners, questions or comments?
I have a question. This is Commissioner Montero. So the original garage was converted already to living space, is that correct?
No, it is actually a working garage, but it's more of a workshop garage right now. He's got a lot of equipment in there.
Okay,
It's not air conditioned or livable. Yeah.
okay. So this new structure would be just right adjacent to that then?
Yes, it's 90 degrees to it.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, I have comments.
Yes.
After seeing the example last month at Date Palm Manor, I really appreciate this approach. I think it meets most of these guidelines from the Secretary of Interior standards, and just I like the materials, colors, and forms. Just it's nice to see the good example after the last month's approach. Thank you.
Thank you, and I agree as well. I had just one follow-up question. Are there any other properties in Day Paul Manor that have had a new garage add-on addition similar to this? And is this similar to that or different, or do you know?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I am not, no, I'm not familiar with any other additions in this manner. Not that there isn't, but I'm not familiar with any. I'm not aware of any. I don't know. I think a lot of the other lots are quite restricted. There's only 2 lots in this development that are the double lots. It was Mr. Clark's, and I guess his brother had the other double lot in this neighborhood. And those are the only 2 I think that would even be able to do something like this, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. If there are no further questions or comments, I believe Dr. Lechner's provided a sample motion in your materials, so we'll accept a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair,
Vice Chair?
move approval is of this project as stated in the staff report.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Gilbert, I'll second.
Thank you. And a roll call.
Oh, can we just amend that motion to just make sure we're including the stated conditions of approval? Just to
Absolutely.
clarify that, yeah. Okay. Would you mind just restating it?
I'll accept that, yes.
Okay, okay, very good. All right.
It was intended.
Okay, no, I understood that. I just wanted to be crystal clear on that. And can we go ahead and get a second on that as well?
Yes, I'll second it with the modification.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gilbert. Okay, shall we move on for a vote then? Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay. Vice Chair Fackler,
Aye.
Commissioner Gilbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Montero,
Aye.
Commissioner Kuroka,
Aye.
Chair Woodson.
Aye.
Okay, that is 6 ayes and 0 nays.
Very well. Motion passes, and thank you very much, Mr. Moffitt, and good luck with the project.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Okay, agenda item 5, update on development plans for the Watson's Flowers site located at 2425 East Apache Boulevard and implications for the historic eligible building. Presenters are Larry Schmaltz and Zachary Lechner, City of Tempe staff. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner, Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Commissioners. I'd like to thank you for allowing me to make a presentation to you today. I'm here representing the City of Tempe's Housing Division and also the Tempe Coalition for Affordable Housing, which is the current owner of Watson's Flower. I would like to briefly kind of go over the Apache Boulevard housing redevelopment for affordable housing and discuss at the end the Watson's Flower site and then take any questions you may have. What we're here to do is, in addition to explain to you what is going on, but also to ask for your recommendations on how to deal with Watson's Flower, the buildings and the history of the project. On the slide, if you could, this is a portion of Apache Boulevard. You'll note in the parcel boundary outlines, those are 4 separate projects we have ongoing. If you, starting from the west to the east, you'll see there at Lemon and Dorsey. That basically is a 2-acre site. It's currently being utilized as parking for the new School for the Arts and also as overflow parking for the light rail system. That's one of the projects. The second project is the Dorsey Park and Ride. It's currently being used as a park and ride, and it's about 1.3 acres. The traveling to the east, you'll see the Apache HUD project there. It's basically about 2.63 acres. The city issued an RFQ for the development of that site. COPA Health and Newtown Community Development Corporation was awarded the RFQ. They're proposing a 5-story apartment building adjacent to Apache Boulevard. And their partner in this is the Newtown Community Development Corporation. They'll be doing 1 to 3-story townhome units adjacent to MacArthur. So your scale would be adjacent to the single-family homes across the street. The COPA project will include it's projected to be about 104 mixed income rental community, serving 30% AMI households, and 30% of the units will be the 30%, and the balance will be 70% will be the 60% AMI. Newtown will be developing adjacent to MacArthur 19 for-sale townhomes. So it's going to be a mixed income, mixed-use development. The next project is the Apache Canal Watson's Flower concept. Currently, Watson's Flower is owned by the Tempe Coalition for Affordable Housing, known as the Affiliate. The Affiliate is a nonprofit which was created by the City of Tempe's Housing Authority in 2018. It was formed to support the acquisition, development, and redevelopment of affordable housing for low and moderate incomes persons in Tempe. But recently, the nonprofit Tempe Community Action Agency has expressed an interest to purchase the Watson's property from the Affiliate. TCAA states that its mission is to foster dignity and self-reliance for the economically vulnerable in the communities we serve. Plans for the site include TCAA administrative offices, city offices, food pantry, and transitional housing. And so we were looking to the commission for recommendations as to dealing with the historic documentation of Watson's Flower. And I'm here for any questions you may have.
Thank you for the information. I'd like to ask you to go in a little more detail about what the proposal is for the actual historic eligible building, please.
I believe, well, based on the condition of the building from
Oh,
what.
Larry, I can go into that. I'd be
Okay.
happy to address
Yeah, I
address
think-
that, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't mind, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess, are there any maybe hold questions for the end, and I'll go ahead and present. And then if we have questions for Larry about the kind of the top-down kind of approach here, which he's outlining, kind of bird's eye view, we can do that along with answering. I can answer any questions about the Watson's Flower building itself.
Sure.
Does that work for you, sir? Okay.
Proceed.
All right. All right, very good. I'll move ahead here. Thank you, Larry.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I had hoped to share some information on the proposed development on the Watson's Flower site earlier, but I had not been able to do that for a couple of reasons. As I had informed the commission way back in May, there was some discussion of this issue at a city council e-session. However, as you know, those proceedings are confidential. And so I wasn't able, unfortunately, I was able to tell you what's happening, and then very unsatisfying for you, I'm sure. Could not tell you what had happened. So it's only, the other reason that this is only kind of coming before you now is that it's only recently that the city has decided to actually incorporate the Watson's Flower site into this larger Apache Boulevard project that Mr. Schmalz is describing to you. And then also there's just been more attention turned on the site itself as a result of that. So plans are now kind of starting to be proposed. So my goal here is to, as I noted in the memo, is to give you some historic preservation considerations related to the Watson's Flower building, as well as just to give you the opportunity to share your own kind of perspective and insight. So this is a historically significant property. It is eligible for the National Register, but although it has not been given that official kind of eligibility by the State Historic Preservation Office. So it's been surveyed a couple of times, once in the late 90s, and then most recently, I believe in 2020 or 2021. And the surveyors who had determined that it is eligible, but that will be something that eventually will have to go before SHPO. It is historic eligible for the Tempe Historic Property Register. That is a classification that was given to it by this very commission back in, I believe, 2001. So it was kind of one of the earlier buildings to get historic eligible status. So I was asked by senior city staff to convey the city's perspective that retaining the building will not be possible, and also to ask the commission for ways to commemorate the demolished property. At the same time, I understand and appreciate that the HPC will likely be interested in talking about other options besides demolition, which it is of course free to do that. So I wanted to, this is a picture of the Watson's Flower site. The circa 1920 Watson's Flower building. You'll see here as building one. I'm going to return to this slide here in just a second and talk a little bit more about that and then the outbuildings specifically. But this site does have ample historic significance. It's associated with commerce on the Bankhead Highway / US 80 between 1921 and 1975. And it's also connected with post-war urban and commercial development in Tempe between 1945 and 1975. And it's also a relatively rare adobe commercial construction. And it's also in the Art Modern style, which makes it pretty rare. It's another unique thing about it is that it's clearly irregularly shaped. It was built in kind of a vernacular style with additions, being added over multiple decades. The central portion of the structure, which you see, it's recessed, and you see it here in the middle of this picture. That's the adobe portion, the east and west wings. So where you see Watson's Flower, that's actually the west side of the building. Those are concrete covered in stucco. The building evolved from the simple adobe structure in the 1920s to its current building footprint with additions, the western addition in the 1930s, the eastern addition in the 1950s. Okay, so back to the parcel. There are also 3 outbuildings that are located on the site, represented here as 1A, 1B, 1C. Those, you recall back in May, the Historic Preservation Commission had approved 2 inventories of historic properties, historical resources, more specifically in Tempe, and Watson's was among them. There was also another study that I appended to the report, or the memo rather, for this item, that gave, I hope you found it fairly informative, providing some information not only on the history of Watson's Flowers, but also some of the historic preservation elements of the building. And one of the things that was noted in this report is that the outbuildings are not considered historic, or that is to have maintained historic integrity. And so they are therefore not historic eligible, either for the Tempe Historic Property Register or for the National Register of Historic Places. Okay, so currently the buildings 1A and 1B, as you see on this slide, those are 2 houses, and then 1C, building 1C, is a cold storage office area. Okay. So the main building, Watson's Flowers, that is the structure that's been deemed by HBC as historic eligible under criteria A and C. So that's essentially for its historical and architectural significance. The original adobe structure was built. It seems that we now know, although there was some kind of discussion of this being a gas station, I don't know that the evidence, at least based on Mr. Vincent and Mr. Jones's report, which I provided to you, the evidence for that doesn't really seem very strong. So as best they can tell, this is originally a residence constructed about 1920. Its owner sold fruit and rented cabins to travelers on the property. The building was purchased by the Watson family in 1934, and it was expanded with, as I mentioned earlier, a western addition about 1936, and that was to accommodate the business Irene Watson's Flowers. Okay, the building was expanded again by about 1956. Okay, with an addition to the east of the original adobe portion, and it's more or less kind of maintained its 1950s era appearance since then. Although one kind of notable absence is the iconic Watson's Flower neon sign, kind of a mid-century sign that was removed and is now kind of with the Mesa Historic Preservation Foundation, kind of pending use in a display of historic signs that they're planning. It's also in very poor condition and would take somewhere in the ballpark of $100,000 to restore it. So that's a potential issue. And if there's any suggestion of like trying to bring it back, for example. So due to its location on a major highway and its owner's business pursuits, the building, Watson's Flowers, serves as a link to the history of 20th century commerce and transportation in Tempe. So the stretch of Apache Boulevard that it's on formed part of the Bankhead Highway, or the Bankhead National Highway. And this functioned as the main route south from the Salt River Valley to Tucson. And the Bankhead Highway also was a cross-country automobile highway connecting Washington, D.C. and San Diego. Okay, so that's the history. Architecturally, it also bears significance, according to Thomas Jones and former City of Tempe Historic Preservation Officer and frequent project consultant Mark Vinson, in that report that I was referencing just a little while ago and you had a chance to take a look at. This is them writing here. As a traditional, streamlined, modern, international style building, Watson's Flowers represents a peculiar moment in local architectural history, especially in the context of roadside architecture. Few, if any, other such examples remain or may have ever existed. All right, so the building itself, as the City On-Call Archaeological Contractor Commonwealth Heritage Group has informed me, takes up about 8% of 8.2% of the parcel overall, the parcel that you're seeing. Now, as Mr. Schmalz was indicating, this parcel, the plan here is for this parcel to be combined with the triangular parcel to the east of it. And so when you take into account that combined lot, Watson's Flower takes up about 5% of the total area. But there are some issues with the Watson's Flower building that are worth consideration, and that is factoring into the city's thinking about that demolition of the building. So here we see a side view of the building, and this shows pretty well the differential between the street level, where you see the little piece of the car there. And so what we're seeing here is the difference in grade between the kind of the sidewalk there and then kind of the building as it slopes down, where there's about 3 feet. So you've got a notable grade change there. These two photos here show a couple of things. One of which is again that grade change, but also the consequences of that. So because it's because of that substantial grade change, the building's tenants have resorted to having to use sandbags to prevent flooding during rainstorms. And here again, we're looking at specifically at that kind of recessed portion that contains the remains of that adobe portion of the building. The building appears to also suffer from some drainage problems, likely has other structural deficiencies resulting from the accretive vernacular construction, and that's what I'm saying there is based on Mark Vinson's updated analysis. The right photo was taken from inside the store to show the perspective from the tabletop window of tabletop and bottom of the window, and a car on Apache, which again just kind of shows you that you're definitely taking a step down when you're inside of that building. So the Historic Preservation Office, as I suggested, has talked further with Mark Vinson about that, and again, he was a subcontractor for Commonwealth, and he worked on that report in part that you had a chance to take a look at. He said that besides his concerns about structural integrity, he noted that this is a quote from him, building components now perceivable from the street consist entirely of the 1950s facade, which was enhanced by neon and other signage which no longer remain. So that is somewhat of a blow to the historic integrity of the building, is what he's arguing there. But he did want to make clear he's not necessarily arguing for demolition, but he is concerned about its preservation potential and what he referred to as its quote unquote diminished integrity. He finished by writing to me, with those considerations in mind, I could agree that documentation and demolition would be the most pragmatic treatment for this property. So is from the conversations that I've had, the information I've received from senior staff, it seems like the city here is heavily influenced by Mr. Vinson's revised assessment. I do want to note that Mark Vinson, when he and Thomas Jones had examined the property originally to write that report, they did not have full access to the site at that time, because at that time it was still owned by the Watsons family, and they just were not allowing access. So they weren't able to go inside of the building, the Watsons Flower building. They weren't able to go behind the site, and so their access was very limited. So something to keep in mind. So again, the city doesn't see a viable way for the building to be preserved, while also allowing for everything that's tentatively planned on it. And as Mr. Schmalz was referring to, this includes a number of things, including workforce housing, city offices, TCAA offices, perhaps a police substation, I believe, or some kind of police, building as well. Cities also looked at the option of partial preservation. So partial preservation might include something like just trying to maintain the adobe portion, the oldest portion of the property. The issue there is that the adobe portion, seems like it was pretty severely, as far as we can tell, reduced in size at some point. And so only about 1 or 2 original adobe walls still remain. So that would just make it tough to just preserve those, just that adobe element. Okay. So senior staff had requested that the Historic Preservation Office come up with some ways to commemorate the Watson's Flower building after demolition, and these were some options that I came up with and passed along as requested. The first one would be to install plaques on the site describing the history of the building, and I think also just kind of what makes the building historically significant, and that's its connection to this kind of larger transportation and commercial history. Secondly, I suggested you're trying to maintain portions, just elements of the building, perhaps some of the adobe bricks, for example. Maybe the section of the building that features the painted Watson's Flower sign for some kind of display. Third, there could be some kind of collaboration with artists. That could include photographers to just document and commemorate the building and its history. And then finally, and this one is just kind of pending consideration by Tempe History Museum, and that would just be to see about conducting oral histories with locals who are in some way connected with Watson's and its long history at this point, about over 100 years or so. So yeah, I'm happy. Larry and Mr. Schmalz are happy to answer any questions that you might have, and look forward to the commission's questions and/or comments. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lechner and Mr. Schmalz, for your presentation. And let me just first say, just appreciate you taking the time to try to outline these issues that have been going on in the city offices and in leadership. And I'd also like to say that I do appreciate finally having a formal presentation of this matter to the commission, which has not yet been brought before this commission before. I do also appreciate the documentation that Mr. Jones and Mr. Vinson provided. I thought that was very well done. Having said that, I have some pretty serious concerns about this project proposal, quite a few actually, but I'm going to belay those comments and allow the other commissioners to express any questions or concerns they might have, and then we will circle back to what I have to say. So I'm going to open it up to the floor to any other commissioners who'd like to have any comments or have questions about this proposal.
Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair.
Larry, could you come forward again, please? You seem to be representing the owner, not necessarily the city, although there's a lot of mixture going on there. Reading the reports that have been done on it, I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that we're jumping to a conclusion of let's demolish it, get it out of the way. Have the owners and their proposed users taken a look at the buildings? If the main building was saved, and I'm not talking about the adobe portion, I'm talking the whole 20s through the 50s building. For the uses that you described, they're essentially commercial uses in a semi-government form. But have you guys had any design work done as to possibly how you could reuse those buildings. It just, without the building actually being surveyed by an engineer, we're being asked to make comment on something that I don't think we've got enough information to make comment on. But let me ask you that question. Have you guys looked at utilizing those buildings for your proposed uses, obviously other than the residential use?
We have had several meetings out there looking at the property. Since the affiliate owns it, we do have have had access to it. And the condition of the building is in questionable condition, especially since it's below grade. And there is a lot of drainage issues, as you can see by the sandbagging and stuff. So it didn't look to us like it was feasible to save the building, but no final decision has been made. But that's just our preliminary determination that it's just not feasible based on the condition of the building, the being below grade, and also in discussions with the previous owner. He's supporting demolition of the building because he's been in control of that building for years, and he's not, he's, like I said, I just say, he supports demolition of the building because of the current condition.
I understand that that's the easy way.
Mhm.
But what I'm talking about is, yes, the building itself is below grade, but there are a lot of buildings that have lower levels below grade. The drainage around that building could be confined, raised, and the building remain at its lower level with transitions down to that level. Now, that's a simplistic thing being said by me sitting here listening to this and having no real indication of what is the structural capability of this building. Again, we haven't had a report that shows that anybody from an engineering or an architectural standpoint has looked at this building. Historical standpoint, yes, but even that was limited in that they didn't have access to the building to begin with. So it makes me pause about wanting to say, yeah, let's document and destroy. And I understand that HAB's documentation is more than, taking a couple of simple photographs. There's detailed drawings and that sort of thing that have to be made when you're going to a HAB standard. But again, I'm really hesitant to jump in and call an end to this building because of drainage.
Yeah, well, it wasn't drainage, it was also based on Mark Vinson's assessment, the drainage and the structural integrity as the
But Mark-
architect and a historic preservation.
But Mark was never in the building and he didn't see two sides of the building other than from afar.
Yeah,
I think there's a step missing here in my mind. And you're asking a commission whose whole purpose is to save significant buildings. Mark himself said this is virtually one of a kind and one of an era. When it's gone, it's gone.
yeah.
And it seems to me like we'd like to at least see some options of what is the condition of the building and what can you do to correct those conditions as well as protect it from storm damage and that sort of thing by regrading it, putting it on a Plymouth, I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's the way I feel right now is that there's a step missing here.
Okay. And that's why we're here, is to get your recommendations. If you want to make that as a recommendation, we'll take it under advisement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and I echo those sentiments myself. Any other commissioners have any comments or questions?
Yes, I do. It's, I'm going to echo Vice Chair Fackler as well. I have significant concerns about talking about demolishing this building with not enough convincing information that anybody's really tried to look at ways to incorporate it into the plan. It is, you know, a rare building, like we've all said, and the photographs in the report from a year or a couple of years ago, you know, I mean, it, I agree with Vice Chair Fackler that that whole front should be preserved and incorporated somehow. And yeah, I would like to see a lot more information about, you know, that these alternatives are at least being looked at. Documentation is, you know, it's acceptable and, you know, it's legally acceptable, but it's definitely not the same. And we have lost so much of, you know, of our historic buildings here in Tempe.
Thank you, Commissioner Montero. And yes, I agree with that sentiment as well. Commissioner Kuroka, were you also wanting to?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
I agree with the Vice Chair. I think that we probably need some kind of study, what to take to preserve this building and reuse before decided that's not feasible. And I thought the city is interested in preserving these historical structure, and I understand it is most programmatic things to do and easiest to do, but I feel it's too easy decision to do that. We definitely like to see the report. What does it take to preserve and reuse for what purpose? And then maybe, you know, attached with cost. And then we can maybe decide it's just not, it's maybe cost prohibitive. I don't know. Until we know that we have the report, we don't really know. It's not possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions or comments from other commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Well, let me just say that first of all, I found this to be a really disappointing, you know, report because, and I've only sat on this commission for not even a year and a half, but I know that the city's made some really fabulous strides in the last many years of developing the historic preservation plan, the program, the historical inventories that have just been updated this year. This building was, of course, on a prior one, and it was already known that it was a historic eligible building. And, you know, coming onto the commission, I've always felt, and living in Tempe as long as I have, I feel like Tempe is a very progressive city. I think everybody recognizes that, you know, and so I'm just kind of still am a bit continually surprised by getting proposals that just sort of come right out and go, we're going to demolish it, because that's what this is saying. I mean, it's not asking for our input. We don't even have a motion available on this at the moment. So what we're reading right now is we're trying to get input on how should we commemorate demolishing this significant building that was built in 1920. So, I mean, I was personally very disappointed to see this being our first formal presentation of this matter. And so another question is, and this is not just directed to you, so I understand you're one of the presenters, so this is a more generic question. So why was this commission even formed? I mean, the collective experience and expertise on this commission is incredibly vast. I mean, I'm not sure people in the audience even realize, I mean, all the stuff, not just the people sitting here, but the people virtually as well. I mean, that's our job. I mean, that's where we volunteer to do this. We want to do this, and it's our, you know, point of being on this commission is to provide our expertise, our recommendations, our point of view, suggestions and recommendations. But from what I've been able to glean from my discussions on this over the last year is that this has been bouncing around now for several years. There's been executive meetings with council. There's been leadership discussions and meetings in, you know, your own day-to-day offices, and, you know, you're kind of going on, and we've never seen this, you know. And so, you know, to me, when I see this, it's yet again one more case where we have, and this isn't just any old building, just echoing what the report and others have said, this is a one-of-a-kind building. It's on a major thoroughfare. It was on the main highway. I mean, everybody in Tempe knows where this building is. So this isn't just some, you know, building in the Dade Palm Estates that we were just talking about, notwithstanding that that's got its own significance. This is a very publicly visible, pretty much anybody who's lived in Tempe for any period of time knows what this building is about. And all the historical significance has been explained and explicated in this report and by Dr. Lechner, and you're aware of it as well. So, again, and just kind of echoing this, I mean, I kind of feel like, the justification for just going ahead and demolishing it is based on, this kind of got some integrity issues, and yes, there's some drainage issues, but, I mean, that really is not a very convincing argument. I mean, honestly, because there's plenty of buildings that have integrity issues and drainage issues. I mean, I don't really feel like that's a valid justification, so to speak, at this point in time, and certainly not with the information we've been presented. And what I'd also like to just say that I think this kind of highlights is that what I would like to see city planners, the planning staff working with developers and other visions like these, entities, the Coalition and the TCAA, and I apologize, I've never heard of those before, but I'm really pleased that there are, organizations like this that are kind of working on these kind of projects, because, we need that kind of, public participation with the city and other people. So that's great. I'm really pleased to hear that. But I kind of like to see, buildings and properties like this that have got these kind of important and significant properties to be seen more as an opportunity rather than an obstacle. Case in point, I mean, granted, I mean, it's one of the more well-known. I mean, this whole rehabilitation just right down the street here of the Hayden House, I mean, it's fabulous. I mean, it's going to be its major centerpiece now of the city. It's going to be there for a long time, and it took a lot of work. I mean, there was a lot. I know that's got a long history going into that, and people here in the audience have been involved with that as too. But I mean, that's like a showcase part of the city now. So, why can't the folks that are involved in this look at this as the same way? Maybe not quite the main significance, I mean, mind you, but I mean, this is, again, I mean, one of the only buildings like this in the entire city, much less probably in this part of the valley. I mean, it's a very unique property. So for me, I would really like to see kind of that attitude brought to these kinds of projects, rather than the commission feeling like, because we've been hearing about this for a year, that's what I'm trying to say. So that's why, to me, it's also a bit of frustration. It's like, well, why haven't you come to us before? And then now you come to us, and yes, you've got a great report, you've got the information, but it's just, we're going to demolish it. That's basically what it reads like. And I would like to note that, I mean, even though I know you're saying that Mr. Vincent did say that he would agree, that he could agree to the demolition, their recommendation was for adaptive reuse, not demolition. So unless that changed from the draft from last year to this year, I think the recommendation was not to demolish the building. So,
Right. Well, his comments were based on new information that he received from the former owner of the building, I believe their son, as well as just him being able, I believe, to go out just and look at the site a little bit more.
sure.
And that was all in like recent weeks.
see.
Yeah.
And I mean, and Mark is a fantastic and respectable, architectural designer, and I have fully trust what some of his point of view is. And just to also point out, I mean, the former owner of the building, notwithstanding that I'm sure their input is kind of somewhat valuable. I mean, I don't think we should be going on their opinion that it should be demolished when we're moving forward with this. So I really don't think that should be taken into consideration as we move forward here. And that we should be, as the city and as the commission and as the planning department I would recommend, be looking at this as an opportunity for that parcel, to be centered around this building. I mean, why not make that your centerpiece of this property and the highlight of it? I mean, that ties into the city's history, ties into the building. It makes it much more than just a housing development, if you see what I mean. So, So, I mean, these are my thoughts right now, and I would certainly, I'm not going to recommend in any way that we proceed with considering, post-demolition commemoration items. I'm not even looking at that, honestly. So I would really like to see this go back to, and again, I'm not even sure exactly which department is dealing with this, as it sounds like this is kind of like a nonprofit kind of entity. I'm not
It's
even
a
totally
team effort, yeah, various city agencies, but yeah, currently the affiliate owns the property. TCA is interested in buying the property, so Believe me, it can be a little dizzying. I can understand that.
And could you clarify, when you say it's an affiliate, so is this a partly city-owned parcel in any way?
No,
No. So the city does not own this parcel.
correct. Correct.
Okay, so where does this tie in with it becoming a city development for low-income housing? I mean, I thought that was part of the whole project, like the other parcels as part of this larger affordable housing project, which is a city project, correct?
It's convoluted. Basically, the affiliate owns the property. They have their own separate board. They're not controlled by the city. They're a private nonprofit group. Another nonprofit group, Tempe TCAA, has approached the affiliate to purchase the property and do a joint development, including city staff in the housing department to go in so they could do a full range of services to complement each other's services, to provide those services to the community.
Okay. All right, well, I'm glad you clarified that, because I mean, I totally did not understand that at all. So what exactly is the city's involvement with this, if you could be sort of concise? Why are we listening to this if it's a private entity developing
Making you
this?
aware of what's going on and get your recommendations as to what you would like to see happen with the building as far as a commemoration and things like that. But it is not owned by the city.
Okay. So there's no hook here for us in any way. We're just sort of hearing this and we can give a recommendation, but there's no requirement or what have you. I mean, this is a private development basically that the city is just sort of advising on, or why, again, I mean, what is the
We're trying to
city's hook?
advise them. We're also, could be potential office space in the development, but that's not been determined yet.
Okay, so there's no funding from the city?
No, there's no funding for the
property-
city, no.
Okay, so this is basically just a private development that they're seeking our opinion on, so to
Correct.
speak.
And keep in mind too, that even if this were a city-owned parcel, or a quote-unquote city project, because this building is historic eligible, according to the Historic Preservation Code, unlike if it were, say, this building were listed or designated in the Tempe Historic Property Register, then if a demolition application was submitted to the city planning division, then according to the code, there'd be a 180-day stay of demolition on that building. With historic eligible property, right, and that would have to go through the Historic Preservation Commission to vote on essentially approving or denying that kind of,
Right.
before the stay kicked in. It would kick in if a denial happened. Well, it's not the case here because it's only historic eligible. So in that case, the request essentially gets routed through the Historic Preservation Office. So there's no kind of specific kind of process that Historic Preservation Commission is involved in there. There's only potentially a 30-day stay of demolition on any demolition permit application that's received by the city. So really, again, you would ask, well, what is the commission for? And yeah, and I know that was rhetorical, but as we know, the main goal or the main function of this Historic Preservation Commission is to act as an advisor on historic preservation issues to council and mayor. And so that's essentially why the issue is being brought before the commission, not to vote on a particular motion, because there's really no motion that would be relevant, right, as I outlined. But really to provide advice, to get insight from the commission.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions,
Sure.
Vice Chair?
I guess I'm going to suggest you ask for what should we do? What can we do? I would suggest that this coalition of groups go back, have the building looked at by an engineer, structural engineer, have it looked at by the architects that are no doubt working on this project, as to how could the building, again, we're just talking about the 20s to 50s portion of the building, all the other I could see coming down, how that building could be protected from drainage issues, solving that drainage. That drainage has to be solved on the full site anyway. What is that solution going to be? How can the building be protected? And how can it be reused as part of the overall development? Between the engineer and the architects, archaeology, if it needs to get involved, don't really see that yet. But they come together with a recommendation to you as to how this building can be used as part of your site. If it can't, why can't it? And that's what we need to see. Then when you come back at some point in time with all the pretty drawings and your full development and showing either this building there or this building not there, the justification for it is there, and we can deal with that in some formal way. But I think who you've heard from on the commission, which is the majority of the commission that's online and here, that's what we need in order to move forward with this. I'd hate to see you jump into specific of your development, come before us in an application that asks us for permission to tear this building down as part of a larger development when it's unknown at this point whether that is the best, not only for the building, but for the city and yourselves. I don't see that as the best solution, or at least it's not been proven yet. So, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I mean, I would echo those as recommendations, and then just to clarify, I mean, we won't be asked to vote or approve the demolition according to basically what Dr. Lechner was just saying. So we really don't have any, authority, so to speak, on this matter. It sounds we're just advisory. So if what we're doing here at this point is just following from that, just to conclude this, I mean, I would echo Vice Chair in terms of his recommendations and suggestions. I mean, I think those are well stated and pretty specific. But knowing full well that this is just our recommendation and suggestion, I mean, I feel like that would benefit, the city and, the historic preservation community and the sort of feeling and appreciation of the city's goals as well to really try to preserve the building. So I would say that would probably be where we could leave this.
Okay. I would like to thank everyone for your taking the time and listening to us and your recommendations. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Larry. Okay. And we've got a stranger coming up for our next presentation. Item number 6, update from the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation. The presenter is Hugh Hallman. Welcome.
Thank you
Mayor
very much.
Hallman.
Yes, it's, as Mr. Fackler knows, I'm as strange as they come. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the Commission, thank you for the opportunity to present to you a little bit of history about the Tempe Historic Preservation Commission, what its purposes are, and how we can all work together. And I hope to end this presentation as an example of exactly that. So I've asked Larry if he wouldn't mind staying for just a moment. I hope you like the slides. I stole from a prior slide deck that I had to make to the City Council on the Coyotes, the formatting, so it's got the nice City of Tempe logo and other good stuff to it, but this is about our commission. So this is a presentation to you, ladies and gentlemen, about the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation and what its purposes are. I want to first start by thanking you for your service here. It's a very difficult job. This commission, as you've just suffered through at an example, sometimes you feel completely powerless. that we have a lot of private development taking place in the city of Tempe, but even a lot of city or city-related development. And it's often the case that historic preservation may not always get the attention it deserves. Certainly, we see in our downtown things that have long gone. Mr. Fackler and I were involved in a project, and we were just discussing when I came up, a building that got built opposite one of our most important historic sites, the Laird and Dines building on the southeast corner of 5th and Mill Avenue, otherwise known as Fackler Square, with good reason. Fackler Square has one of our earliest and most important buildings still in existence because of work Mr. Fackler engaged in with private developers to preserve that particular building. Concurrently, on the opposite corner, those same developers tore down a very old adobe that dated back to the city's founding. It was in terrible shape, but I was still sad to see it go, as I know Mr. Fackler was. And instead, we now have a building, many of us called it the Gordon Biersch building. It's where the Starbucks is. It looks like it fell out of the Midwest opposite the Laird and Dines building, but it does not date to that same period. That's an example of the successes and failures we have in historic preservation, going back even to the creation of the Laird and Dines reuse building. It did not really meet perfect on all fours historic preservation person's desire that everything be preserved. By the same token, it gave it a new life through significant reuse. The same is also true of the Andre building, which is on Mill Avenue on the same side of the street, closer to the mill. It's the end cap building by the nearly 30-year-long non-working clock. As an example of a historic reuse, that building actually burnt up about 15 years ago. Yeah, well, the last time, some crazy guy who was between serving as mayor and a council member took on the project to redo the steel inside of that building. So the Andre building still exists, dating back to 1899, 98, I can't now remember myself. And it is preserved in place because that building is now hung on a steel box that's within the building. So the brick walls around it are literally curtains hanging on that ball. Again, not a perfect preservation, but the other choice was to watch the bricks crumble to the ground after the fire burnt it up completely. We have some fairly impressive pictures of our Tempe firefighters working to try to keep the building from spreading to the surrounding buildings. So I happen to be what some folks are sorry about, that I tend to be fairly practical about my approach to historic preservation, because I do know that money is fungible, but it is not unlimited. So we have limited resources that we need to apply to try to maximize the likelihood that we save the built environment and the ancient environment around us. And so that's why I'm here tonight, is to talk about this Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, its founding. So I'll give you a little direction there. The foundation was founded in 2005 by two women who'd been working in historic preservation here. Their focus at the time was to try to save the Eisendrath House. It's that big pink adobe that's up on College Avenue, immediately north of the Arizona Historical Society Museum building, now called the Conservation, what did they call it? I can't even remember. No, not the History Museum. I can't remember what the Conservation Center or something like that. Point being is that we've been here longer than the number of names that building has taken on. And the Eisendrath House dates back to 1929. Rose Eisendrath built it in the county. She and her husband liked to come to Arizona and enjoy the sun, and the winters here were much better than the Chicago winters they were otherwise subjected to. They had a glove manufacturing company back in Chicago. They'd come out here, and Mr. Eisendrath passed away. Rose wanted to stay here and continue to visit Arizona, but she was Jewish, and the resorts in Arizona at the time were restricted. And so she was not allowed to stay at places like the Jokaki Inn. So she decided to hire the architect of the Jokaki Inn, Robert Evans, who was known for having worked in adobe. He actually is the person who preserved the Hayden House in its 1925 configuration that you see now. That was Robert Evans's work, and we brought that building back to the Evans rehabilitation period. And Robert Evans was hired by Rose Eisendrath to create the Eisendrath House. which he did, and that was done in 1929-30. It was interesting that his family was involved in running the Jokaki Inn. So here we have a kind of an interesting way that Tempe's history wraps around itself several times in any given building, and the Eisendrath is an example. So these ladies sought to preserve the Eisendrath house. It was going to be subject to loss because the owner of the property had it rezoned to build kind of a resort project there without preserving the property. But in the old days when we could have zoning lapse, he let the zoning lapse. You may remember that, Dave. And some snot-nosed council member and his mother and their neighbor decided to see if we couldn't save it. And we created a three-cornered exchange, a property exchange, in which the owner of that property gave that 15 acres up in exchange for what is now Rio Salado and Priest, where at the moment the Carvana buildings are going up for the new Carvana project. The foundation was formed, and the city council at the time from 98 to 2002 agreed to take the property, but even one council member at the time said that he would agree to vote for the property exchange only on condition that the Eisendrath house be torn down. He'd spent significant time as a council member and member of this community watching $2.2 million get spent on the B.B. Moore House, which is where you used to and sometimes still have meetings. The B.B. Moore House cost us about $2.2 million and became used as the offices for the TCC, the Tempe Community Council. Thank you, jeepers. I'm losing my acronyms as Larry was having trouble with Tempe Community Action Agency. Those two agencies actually supply services to folks in distress situations. TCAA is actually officed currently at the community center that's in the park over on the west side of or on the east side of our community. And they are looking for offices. That may solve your question about why are they doing this. But if you really want to know in politics whether or not you have any effect, do understand that TCAA gets a significant amount of its funding from the City of Tempe. And so if the City of Tempe's Historic Preservation Commission wanted to suggest to the council that maybe they use some of the tools in their basket to assure that this property be reused as part of an office project for the Tempe Community Action Agency, they might be able to do so. In addition, the sole source of funding for the affiliate is the City of Tempe. So the City of Tempe created an affordable workforce housing affiliate so that it could go out, assemble property, use grants and those kinds of things coming from the City of Tempe, and its primary source of funding is the City of Tempe. So you do have some levers in this instance that you could apply if it turns out that that house and the buildings are really the 1920 to 1950 florist shop, the Watson's Flowers building, the Adobe portion, and the other parts of it, could be reused. You've got some levers. It helps to have been involved in politics as long as he has in this community, because he knows where all the bodies are buried and can probably exert some of that influence if necessary. Right, Larry? Yeah, indeed. So here, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation is a nonprofit. It is a 501c3, but it's not actually received an official exemption because it doesn't have to. Its job, as I'll explain at the end, is not fundraising. Its job is to serve as an advocate for historic preservation. And so as a result, it averages less than $50,000 a year in revenues, so it doesn't actually have to get a formal exemption from the Internal Revenue Service, and the tax return it has to do with the service is a postcard. Go ahead with the next slide here. That's what the foundation's purpose is. We do have a mission statement, but frankly, it boils down to this. It's to provide community members, our residents, with a means directly to participate in Tempe historic preservation. And it does that through advocacy. Like the two women who founded the agency, or this foundation, they went to the city in the late 1990s and beat on the council, and the council member in particular, that we do a property exchange at least to have an opportunity to save a building. Then they worked toward figuring out how the city and others might actually do it. And so this foundation was created as a means for people like these two women to engage in direct advocacy for the preservation of historic assets. So current officership, we have Thank goodness. Our president is with us this evening, Don Hart. That'd be the next slide. We have historic preservation officers leaking out of our ears. Joe Nucci, who is our vice president and co-chair, is the former historic preservation officer. Amy Douglas is the former director of our history museum. Todd Skinner is a ne'er-do-well Tempean who does all of our bookkeeping. And then you see the rest of the folks, which include, of course, John Southard, the immediate past historic preservation officer, as well as a whole bunch of other ne'er-do-wells joining Todd Skinner. Its activities are to advocate for preservation of Tempe historic assets. I gave you the story of the Eisendrath House, but it also advocated for others. The Hayden House among them, keeping the mill and silos from being torn down when others might have, and Mr. Fackler worked diligently to try to save that and keep it put in place. And I think you had your hand in at least 2 deals to try to keep all that stuff in place. Bay State Benton Robb, as I recall, and then MCW. Again, the folks who did the Laird and Dines building with Ted Clausen hand scrubbing bricks inside and discovering on an interior wall a list of all the Tempe residents who had served in World War I. That's how it was preserved then, and it's now that piece has been taken to one of our military organizations to preserve in place there. So it advocates for preservation of Tempe historic assets, undertakes events like, for example, I'll show you a few in a minute, that highlight our historic assets, then engages in public outreach like, well, recruiting me against my will to show up here and take up your time, participate in city planning and oversight processes, which you also participate in, and then it's limited fundraising that I'll describe again. So, an example of the advocacy I gave you at the top, which was the Eisendrath House, seeking that it be preserved in place so that it not get torn down, then finding a way to actually execute that. Another effort that sort of failed was the relocation of the Valley National Bank Dome that was at Apache Boulevard and Rural Road on the northwest corner. The university, Arizona State University, ended up acquiring that property and insisted that it be torn down. So the best we could do was ultimately save the geodesic dome across the top, which is now a shade structure of part of the new dorms south of Apache Boulevard. The mill and silos I touched on. The Gonzalez-Martinez House, you have a grant application concept that you're going for. Our foundation is supplying a letter that would support it, and given the ne'er-do-wells that we have some political influence over the processes, and I can describe that. So, for example, this foundation worked diligently to advocate for saving the O'Connor House. The O'Connor House was in Paradise Valley, north of the canal, at 32nd Street approximately, and Denton Lane. It was going to be torn down. The fellow who bought it wanted to build a McMansion there, and the O'Connors had built the house in 1959 in some part with their own hands. Well, it had to be moved. That immediately takes it off the qualification for being a historic property. Moving something severs that tie and connection. But again, I'm kind of a practical guy, and many of our members of the commission are. We'd rather see something saved because, after all, in its new location after 50 years, it will be historic in that location. You just have to live long enough. In addition, it's pretty hard to replace a building that was built by the first female who was appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. And that building was about to be bulldozed. So that foundation, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, advocated for that. And with one of its partner agencies, then raised the money and moved the house. It cost $3.2 million to move it out of Paradise Valley and reposition it in Papago Park in Tempe, immediately south of the Arizona Conservation Center, or whatever it's called, with the Eisendrath immediately north of it. The Hayden House, we talked about, and you know about it. The Double Butte Cemetery rehabilitation. The cemetery's in horrible place and condition, and it happens to be one of the great historic sites in our community. We have to be a little cautious about this because we don't want to offend anybody that we're sort of celebrating our cemetery. But it is, after all, the location for the founders of this community where they lay in rest, except, of course, Annie Hayden. I'll give you $10 if you can tell me why, notwithstanding that there is a headstone for Annie Hayden. She was one of the 4 Hayden children. Why she is not in that cemetery. I'll tell you the story at the end. Or you can come to the ghost tours and hear that. Next slide, we then undertake these kinds of events. The Night Preserve was the very first event the Preservation Foundation put on. It was and did raise about $80,000 over 2 different events in 2 years for money to go to the Eisendrath House, Well, $80,000 doesn't get you very far with historic preservation. That house, that project cost $4.8 million to do. All of these projects that I'm describing are projects that are for and in connection with the city, but are not funded by the city of Tempe. Through the time that the Art Center was built with the new tax, which has quality of life issues in it, and you can advocate for that money to be spent on historic preservation, the city didn't have that kind of money. We barely had enough money to employ a state historic preservation or a historic preservation officer and a city architect, Mark Vincent. That's why he's pretty familiar with all this stuff, because he served as our architect. In fact, if you go to the back, he's the artist who did this logo. He's brilliant and has served on our commission until he decided to move to North Scottsdale or some terrible place. The Mill Avenue tours take place about every 2 years now. They had taken place every year, and that is people are invited to come down to Mill Avenue, and our docents give people a tour of all the historic buildings in and around downtown. The cemetery tours have taken place now 3 times. And that is, we invite people to come to the cemetery, and our docents give tours of the sites around that. They often don costumes so that they can be in character of the people who were buried there. A former mayor actually played Carl Hayden, brilliantly, I might add. And now we have the upcoming ghost tours, which will be on November 6th. And that's where you can hear the story that I'll tell you at the end nonetheless about the famous ghosts that still inhabit downtown. Our public outreach and education includes distributing information at public events. We act as docents at historic sites. We have put up historic plaques at the most important Tempe sites, like you'd see ultimately at Watson's Flowers if it were preserved in place. And then we have a website that highlights the activities. We participate, in the next slide, the Mill Avenue Historic Preservation Corridor Ordinance rewrite, which you all participated in. It ultimately failed, in part because we were concerned that the ordinance rewrite was allowing too much flexibility in the destruction of what remains as historic sites on Mill Avenue. We participate in the general planning processes, which you do every time the city goes through a 2020, 2030, now we're at 2050. The Historic Preservation Foundation participates to advocate for preserving things in place. Development project engagement, like the Hayden House and the streetcar project, to make sure that our historic sites and our ancient historic sites and sacred sites are preserved. So when the streetcar was being pushed forward, there was a chance that it would take another bite out of the butte on the south side of Rio Salado. So we jumped in and advocated and worked pretty diligently, and one of us beat up Scott Smith, at least orally, about the fact that the Valley Metro Rail was not going to take another bite out of the butte, that the streetcar alignment could actually go down the middle of the street at that location, and ultimately they did. And we mentioned that we've got advisory letters, policy papers, and other efforts to step in, including that we'll be supplying a letter supporting your support for the city of Tempe to get a grant for the Gonzalez Martinez House. The next slide, we do have charitable status limits on our direct fundraising, but that doesn't mean we don't participate in fundraising and work with organizations. So our partner organization for many of our projects, or many of its projects, is the Rio Salado Foundation. So the Rio Salado Foundation took the advocacy from this foundation, the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, and then raised the money to undertake the rehabilitation of certain sites. So it did the Eisendrath House for $4.8 million, the O'Connor House for $3.2 million, tore down all the crap that was around the mill and silos so that the area could be cleaned up and people could come to appreciate the mill. That cost $600,000 to create the lawn, the lighting system, and other features there, including the signage, which, by the way, can get cleaned up. We designed those so that they're about $50 to replace them. They're on sort of a linoleum material. They can be easily printed and we can put them back on. So as people scar them, we should talk about how to get that done. But the restrictions mean we have to have these partnerships because the foundation can advocate, but there are other partners who have different roles to play, just as you have a role. So going to the next slide, that role is our foundation advocates for historic preservation and then works with partners to undertake historic preservation, like the Rio Salado Foundation itself. This commission then keeps an eye on what's going on because at some point, somebody that wants to take down a historic property has to come to the city and seek a demolition permit, and if the property is properly positioned, has to at least have some waiting time before the bulldozers can meet the walls. And this is the kind of thing that happens in Tempe. somebody by accident ends up on your agenda this evening and hears about the Watson's Flower Building, which we have been worrying about for a lot of time. Vic has been fussing over the Watson's Flower sign. He's the one who stole it and took it to Mesa, where it currently is held. He raised $100,000 for the diving lady to have it restored in Mesa in place. But you couldn't do that on the Watson Flower sign? No. But as a result, things happen. So the reason I asked Larry to stay, I hope you won't be offended, but I stuck my nose into your business as it was taking place in front of me. It strikes me that this commission has already suggested that there needs to be kind of a needs assessment and of the building and whether or not it can be repositioned and reused. That costs money. It's probably in the range of, it cost us $30,000 to do the Gonzalez Martinez. What do you think it would cost to do Watson's Flowers, to have somebody take a look at it? 40? If I got you up to 50, you think you could get that done? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so because of your insight, because of your insistence, because of your passion for historic preservation, while I was sitting here, I was doing a little bit of texting, and we've already assembled the potential donation, and I'm pretty sure it'll all happen because I know the people well, of $50,000 to undertake a needs assessment and a building assessment for the Watson's building, the 1920 to 50 building, to see if it could be reused and incorporated into a project that could then preserve that streetscape, which is what we're really talking about. Again, as a practical person, I don't know that I can save every feature of the building, but what we really need to save is that look and feel of the city of Tempe. Because if we fail to preserve the fabric, the threads that create this colorful fabric that is Tempe, we might as well be Scottsdale. Okay, worse, Gilbert. The point being that we ought to be engaged to try to save those features because Tempe is unique. And no, we have not done it perfectly. We've failed on many occasions. We lost the building on the northwest corner of Fackler Square, but we kept the building on the southeast corner of Fackler Square and many others. And I try to celebrate those successes, recognizing we're going to lose some. So, for example, second governor of the state after B.B. Moore, who was Tempean sportscaster. Oh, come now. Over on Maple, we saved his house. It's not perfect. I can hear his voice. His voice is about as deep as yours. Howard Pyle. Who said Howard Pyle? Howard Pyle, Governor Pyle. Yes, in fact, it is a lie that you can't be a mayor and then become the governor of this state. In fact, the only governors of this state who were formerly mayors were Tempe mayors. So it's true you can't be governor if you were mayor of Phoenix, but Tempe has at least two. The point is that that was not a perfect save. It was not a perfect rehabilitation, but the Howard Pyle home still is there, and it's important that we have B.B. Moore's house and we have Howard Pyle's house. Next up on our block is probably going to be the Burchett House. Again, another property owned by Arizona State University on the corner of 6th and Forest, right? We're going to have to swap some land and do some other things, but we got to make sure that when Arizona State University needs something, we don't give it to them for free, that we start getting back the stuff we need every time they need something from us. And that would be an example, if historic preservation is important to you. So the whole point is we all have different roles. Your commission role is to deal with the stuff you're dealing with tonight, feeling frustrated sometime that you don't have necessarily a direct, active role. But you do, because you keep pointing out things that are at risk, and those of us out here in the community listen, and then we try to step in and make sure that we can undertake activities that will continue to preserve Tempe's history. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. We didn't quite have enough stuff to pass out to you, so I've got a few of these. This is an example of the material we prepare. This is the Adobe tour that's given once or twice a year, depending on who's interested. And it is of the 6 main Adobe buildings that the city of Tempe has preserved or been involved in preserving. If and when we have it the next time around, you're welcome to join us. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
Well, first of all, outstanding. Thank you very much, Mr. Hallman. And we very also, I'd just like to say, yes, I mean, that's fantastic that you're just already out there, kind of getting some money together for this project we were just talking about. That's fantastic to hear. But no, I appreciate the update, and Ms. Hart? Yeah, because I know we were hearing from you several months ago, so thank you all very much. I'm glad you all were able to come. I know I learned a lot. I did not know that much about the foundation or these other entities that you were kind of integrating in your presentation, so thank you very much.
Pleasure.
And commissioners, anybody have any questions?
Chair,
Yes, Vice
I'm
Chair.
waiting for the ghost story.
Oh, so I'll try to be fast, but it's a
right.
great Tempe history story. So Charles Trumbull Hayden and his wife had 4 children, but little Annie Hayden died when she was just under 3 years old. She didn't quite make her 3rd birthday. The obituary and the news stories say that Annie Hayden died from eating green apples, and her father, who gave the eulogy at her gravesite, explained that the reason she had passed is because this community did not then have the knowledge it needed to save children like Annie. And so he, with others, found land and got the state to create the Normal School, which is now Arizona State University, as part of his legacy. But Annie Hayden passed away. The Hayden House was built in 1871. She passed away, I think it was in 1880, in that era, before the Double Butte Cemetery was created. She was buried in the yard of the Hayden House. If you ever went to dinner at Monty's La Casa Vieja, the fountain room, which incorporated the garden, included the fountain that was built in 1925 when Robert Evans redid the house. The Hayden sisters, the 2 surviving Hayden sisters, ran a little hotel and other food operation. Annie Hayden does have a grave marker at the Double Butte Cemetery, but John Southard, your predecessor, and I did significant research to try to figure out whether or not Annie Hayden was ever exhumed. Why were we doing that? Because the Hayden House was going to be rehabilitated, and we were trying to think about the way in which the entire grounds could properly be examined. And one of the issues is, would Annie Hayden be found? Because she was never exhumed. Now, the likelihood is a 2.5-year-old, very soft bones, doesn't really leave a corpse. They would have had a very rough hewn casket for her, and she was buried a little deeper than we probably dug, but approximately where that fountain is. I told this story when I was giving a tour of the then Hayden House as it was Monty's La Casa Vieja. And the young fellow who was then in his late 40s running it for his father, he'd inherited it, Michael, stood there and came up to me almost in a sweat. And he said, "I never heard that story, but I've had staff run out of this room screaming that they can hear the sounds of a little girl laughing." Welcome to Tempe.
Good story. I've not heard that either. Okay, well, thank you again very much. That was great, and we very much appreciate the information. So hopefully we'll be able to collaborate or coordinate anyway as things go forward with some of these other buildings, especially Watson's Flowers. So let's keep that in mind. All right, moving on to our item number 7, request for approval of a motion in support of rehabilitating the historic eligible and National Register listed Gonzalez Martinez House.
Yeah, so just briefly, this is actually what Mr. Holman was referring to. I am in the process of applying for as I mentioned to you last time, was it last time? Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, when we spoke about the Gonzalez Martinez House. I'm in the process of applying for a Heritage Fund Historic Preservation grant through Arizona State Parks and Trails. We have some city CIP funding to match what this year would cap out at a $150,000 award for the Heritage Fund grant. So I'm in the process of applying for that. Deadline for the first round of applications is November 1st. So, hopeful about that. But one of the things that the folks who review those applications want to see is what they deem public support for projects that are having funding requested for them. And so public support can come in many ways. It can come from, and again, appreciate very much the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation support for this project through a letter and through some other just more informal means. So what I'm requesting from the commission is to pass this motion, and that will just be another piece of evidence for the purpose of the application that we have quote unquote public support for this particular rehabilitation, and so that's what the reason is. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about it.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, definitely following up from your presentation at the last meeting and the discussion thereafter. So absolutely, I have no doubt that someone will very quickly offer a motion to support this.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
I second the motion, Commissioner Montero.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right. Do we need to take a vote, I guess?
We shall. Vice Chair Fackler,
Aye.
Commissioner Gilbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Larson,
Aye.
Commissioner Montero,
Aye.
Commissioner Kuruka,
Aye.
and Chair Woodson.
Aye.
Okay, that is 6 in favor and none against.
Excellent. Motion passes, and good luck finishing the proposal, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is quite a task, but I'm glad to do it, and I will certainly keep you updated on what happens. So.
Absolutely, and it's yet another one of the truly significant buildings that I know that the city is now focused on it. It's going to happen, and it's just, a matter of kind of making the wheels grind through the process and get that funding and the motivation. So great, this is excellent. Okay, moving on, agenda item 8, chair and staff updates. I don't have any particular updates this evening other than to mention that the Historic Preservation Conference is happening in Yuma. I think next week, right?
I believe so. Yeah.
I'm not planning to attend, but maybe some people here are thinking about it or maybe going. So go HPC. So that's about all I have.
Okay, I do have some staff updates. So there was just to follow up on a couple of things. I know it seems like Date Palm Manor all day, all the time around here recently. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of agenda items for the other Date Palm Manor property that was discussed at the last meeting. And so this is, just as a refresher, this is 137 West Palmcroft Drive, one of the contributing properties in that Tempe Historic Property Registered District. The property owner had mentioned, and remember this property owner was proposing and HPC approved a certificate of appropriateness for this kind of a large kind of prefab metal garage, and it was a split vote, as we remember. The property owner had mentioned that a neighbor of his in the same neighborhood had installed a similar kind of large metal garage, and said he wasn't aware of that neighbor having to have gotten a permit. So I learned that the property in question is 32 West Palmdale, which is a contributing property. So there, that did happen, and it wasn't an issue that he didn't have to get a permit. He did get a permit, the property owner, I determined. However, it basically did not pass through kind of the Historic Preservation Commission as it should have, and that is because it was not marked properly in our tracking system, which will, when a permit application comes through, kind of how it works is that, the planner will be able to see, okay, this is a historic property or it's a contributing property in a historic district. And unfortunately, that property was not appropriately marked. So Historic Preservation Office is going to be working to, look into what are other potential discrepancies? What are some other, contributing properties that may have been missed when that information was migrated over to the current permitting system? And we'll be working, doing some data entry to try to not to try, but to actually correct that problem to, prevent that from happening in the future. Okay. So that is what happened. So there was a permit issued. The person didn't do anything wrong. They went through the proper and received the proper permit, went through the proper channels, but it just was unfortunately missed as a result of that discrepancy. I also wanted to follow up, if I could, on regarding Commissioner Fackler's question relating to 137 West Palmcroft. He had a question: would this property or this permit being requested by the property owner, would it require a variance? I checked with one of my colleagues in the planning division, and she told me that because the proposed garage addition, and again, this is for this detached prefab garage, because the garage addition is a little over 11 feet in height, a 6-foot minimum setback from the side of the property line would be required, she said. However, per the kind of zoning code, when there's when adjacent to a dedicated public alley, the side yard setback for an accessory building like that we're discussing shall be measured from the midpoint of the alley. And as she said, it appears the alley is 16 feet wide. So as a result, they would not need a variance and they could proceed directly to building permits. Okay. So I mentioned that to Vice Chair Fackler, and I just wanted to, at the request of the chair, which is a good suggestion, just wanted to make everyone aware of that. One other update. There was another, and I'll explain what I mean why it's another demolition application for 606 South Roosevelt Street received on October 6th. So just a few days ago, really. And this is for the Marriott House, which is a historic eligible property built in 1935. Again, it's at 606 South Roosevelt Street. And this may ring a bell for the commissioners because former HPO Southard had informed the commission of a previous demolition application at the commission's November 2021 meeting. Now, the house is under new ownership, and so as a result, because it's under new ownership, a new demolition application had to be submitted. And so this kind of starts over the process again, the 30-day stay of demolition that I mentioned earlier in reference to Watson's Flower. So that 30-day stay of demolition expires on November 4th. So I've emailed the applicant to explain the stay, to suggest adjusting plans, potentially to save the structure. That applicant, however, is the owner of a demolition company. So I don't think that they're going to be too amenable to my advice. So I'll also be following up with the property owner / developer. I don't know, it may be the same developer. So again, it's unfortunate now as it was in November, when the original 30-day expired and it was kind of set to be demolished. But we're gonna in the HPO, we're gonna give it a shot and see if a more HP friendly solution could be worked out. And at the very least, if they still do demolish it, to see if they might be open to documenting it. To at least have some kind of written documentation of what had been there. So just wanted to update the commission on that as well.
Could you refresh my memory? We heard this last year, and
Yeah.
But what happened? I forgetting the exact motion or what happened with that.
It was during a staff update. Mr. Southard had just basically, like I'm doing now, I just informed the commissioners that a demolition permit request had been put forward, had been brought to the permitting division of the Community Development Department. And he was kind of explaining the process. So again, in this case, because it is a historic eligible building, it doesn't come under the specific purview of the Historic Preservation Commission according to city code, specifically the Historic Preservation Ordinance. So what the city code says is that in these instances, the application passes through the planning division and then also goes, but before it is approved, it goes to the Historic Preservation Office, specifically the Historic Preservation Officer. A 30-day stay of demolition is imposed, during which time the HPO has the opportunity to reach out to the applicant, basically, or people involved in the project, to see if there might be some type of non-demolition solution approved. However, if a solution that is satisfactory to the applicant is not reached, they can, at the end of that 30 days, go ahead and demolish the application. They would receive the demolition permit, in this case have it issued to them on November 4th, and then they could proceed with demolition. Yeah, so that is the process. Yeah.
So, Chair Woodson and Commission members, I have a quick update too. As you know, we're working on the General Plan 2050. Mr. Packler does represent this commission on the Technical Advisory Group. So he knows that we've already discussed the historic preservation element, both at the Technical Advisory Group and also the Community Working Group. So we continue to get inputs on those. And we had the first complete citywide public meeting on October 26th. That's a Wednesday, from 6 to 7:30 at the Arizona Mills Mall Lego Land Discovery Center. So you can spread the word, anyone who is interested. We have like 1.5 hours of kind of workshop format. People will show up. We have professional facilitators who will help people to kind of think of the memory and think of what they want in the city, so we can get some good, interesting feedback. So just wanted to provide that update on that one, and the process is ongoing. Thank you.
And there's Legos too, right? And
There are Legos and
Yeah.
other playing mechanisms too. It's going to be fun.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the update.
and Chair, I didn't have any further updates from the Historic Preservation Office.
Could you also update on Commissioner Williams' involvement with that committee?
Oh, I was going to wait till the next agenda item under member announcements to do that, but if you'd like me to do it now, I can.
Yeah, I mean, since she's not here, just do it
Sure,
on her behalf,
sure.
yes.
Yeah, so yes, Commissioner Williams, who had to be absent this evening, she had just asked me to mention that she's been selected to serve on the city's street and park renaming ad hoc committee. So as you may know, this committee was established to rename streets and parks in the city that had been named after individuals who had membership in the Ku Klux Klan. And so that's, I think we can agree, that's a worthy project. And so Commissioner Williams will be serving on that ad hoc committee and providing, I'm sure, very good advice to aid that work, that very good work moving forward.
Very good, thank you. And just out of curiosity, is there any hook for this commission with that effort going on, since they're dealing with parks and streets and schools or whatnot?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have not received, really kind of any invitation for me personally or for the commission. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't answer in the affirmative to you on that. So that's really all I know. I did receive an email basically from some elements in the city asking me to reach out to Commissioner Williams to see if she'd be willing to serve on the committee, but that's really the only role I've played in the process. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I will say HPO Southard may have had some advice. I mean, this process has been going on for a while. I believe the decision to established the committee was made, in the fall of last year. So he may have had some input that I'm just not aware of. So.
Very well, thank you. Any further updates?
No, not staff updates.
Okay, moving on then to agenda item 9. Any current event announcements and future agenda items from members? Any member announcements? No, hearing none. Any other staff announcements?
Oh, I'll just mention, as I typically do, kind of what's on tap for the November meeting. And I'm sorry, folks. When I came into the position, Mr. Adhikari, I have to say I feel a little misled because he said, well, you'll probably meet, maybe half of the months, and here we are without a break. But it's
I didn't say quite half a month, but I did say about 3 meetings a year did get canceled.
Okay,
You were in luck.
that's
You're getting all
fair.
the meetings.
That's fair. That's right. That's right. There was one earlier. I just wasn't here. I kid, of course. But at the November meeting so far on the agenda, we'll need to have a request for the commission to approve the 2022 annual report for the Historic Preservation Commission, which Ms. Daniels and I will be putting together. And so we're working on that now. And, that just you may recall from last year, it just presents information about, the attendance of commissioners. It provides information about what the commission accomplished in the past year. And so it's just a required process that has to go to the city each year. And in our case, being a commission, it has to receive the formal approval of the commission before it's forwarded on to the city clerk's office. So, but that's all for now. Not to say that other things couldn't be added, but if that is the case, that could potentially be a very short meeting. I'm just saying.
Okay, thank you very much. And any further other staff announcements? Okay, hearing none then we will move to adjourn the meeting then at 7:56 p.m. Okay, thank you,
Good night.
everybody. Good night.
Thank you.